I think too many therapists think they're in charge. We're responsible, but we're not in charge. Well, I've decided that this client is ready to finish, or this client isn't meeting his goals. I hate goals. That's another story. Goals and objectives. Those were created by insurance companies, so you could just get 9 sessions and ask for 3 more. These are not piano lessons. So yeah, I think preparation is critical. If you do that, if you're well prepared before the client comes in, you're open to anything, ready for anything. And you've generated some warm, caring feelings for the person before they come in.
As because in compassion, there's the warmth and the goodwill, but you're not necessarily getting swept up in their pain or their suffering or in their anger or whatever it might be. It's a skill I'm so grateful to have practiced, like internally knowing the difference between those two things, because I think a lot of people don't know that there's a difference, and I think that can make life very hard, unnecessarily so. All right, David, it's a real pleasure to talk to you. I discovered you, the age of the internet is so fascinating. I think I used Quora one time to read something on it, and I started getting fed a lot of your posts and responses to my inbox, and every time I catch one come through, because I do have to confess it's my email that I do all my subscriptions in, I absolutely love reading them and feel like you've been kind of a pseudo informal supervisor
Wow.
to me in my training as a therapist. And so it's a real treat to be able to talk to you. And I wanted to talk to you about a whole bunch of different things, but the question I want to begin with is, what is it like, by your articulation, becoming a therapist? How does one, with that training and all that experience, how do they change? How are they distinct from what the typical non-therapist might be versus how we might kind of see the world?
I think that becoming a therapist doesn't happen so much in the classroom, where we learn a lot of different theories, interesting as they are. I think that you mentioned the word supervision earlier, and sometimes people think that means we're their boss or something like that. I'm old, so I do a lot of supervision, and I get supervision too for the cases I'm working on. And if I were to get supervision, there are several people I would call and talk like this online typically. Says, well, I've got a case. I would disguise the details and make up a name, and then we chat about the case. And I almost always get some good input. So that's supervision is, I think, how we become psychotherapists. We actually do the work. We already know how to have conversations with people. Some of us are better than others. And as we refine those conversational skills, it's a conversation that has an intention and a purpose. And that is relief of suffering, healing, just providing a safe spot where someone can explore their own ideas, all the things that that unique conversation that psychotherapy creates. So the way we learn is by doing. There really isn't any other way. The doing can be role plays. There's a lot of role play going on in early training. Mm-hmm. And even now, I have a group of therapists I work with on a fairly regular basis. We call ourselves Team Audacity. And the audacity is because I formed the belief that psychotherapists tend to be too cautious and overly worried about boundaries. Once someone is skilled, they're not going to make a horrible mistake. And if they do, they know how to fix it. So the therapists I work with are all experienced and all established. So I say, well, if you were going to be really bold about this, what would you do? Like take a risk? I said, yeah, like take a risk. What would you do? But before that happens, or we might role play it right there online. And I said, okay, you be the client and I'll be the therapist, or vice versa, switch roles. So it is in the conversation that we learn. And I think it's a lot like I've taken acting lessons, and I often recommend acting lessons to psychotherapists and sometimes to clients, especially people who have social phobias and things like that. But in acting lessons, you really learn while performing. I mean, you start, say, okay, be a tree or whatever the hell it is, but soon, soon you're performing and you're engaging with the audience, and soon you might forget that you're acting and you're in role, and it's in communication with the audience. So I think psychotherapy recapitulates a lot of human interactions, because a lot of the things we do in psychotherapy are silent. We watch, you and I as psychotherapists watch very closely for nonverbal cues. Again, I'm watching you right now, and your face is just alive. I know when I'm saying something interesting, or hang on, get to the good part, or whatever. You're watching me, and that's a conversation too. Even if we were speaking Swahili, there would be some conversation going. So I think it's a conversation between one person who has some aims, objectives, goals, hopes, and another person who's highly trained and experienced, and maybe has some talent too. That's always a good thing. In assisting the other person in finding themselves, finding their power, discovering their possibilities, and all the rest, unique to each individual.
Oof, there's so much I want to respond to there. The first, I guess, I'll do a share and then another question. The share is I was on this flight and I was sat next to this elderly Japanese couple. And we didn't really interact much during the flight, but when we stood up and we were kind of waiting to shuffle off, they interacted with me. And I don't know who said hello to who first, but the assumption was that we'd be able to communicate, and they did not speak a word of English. I mean, they really just, spoke, and it was a short conversation, but to your point that conversations can be so nonverbal, we had a full-on conversation just through body language and facial expressions, just from the humor of not being able to communicate, and the kind of like the how was your flight, like kind of like the nodding, and it was good, but they didn't have the thumbs up kind of reference, such a different culture, and like I think I bowed at one point because I was trying to but it was so it was kind of messy, but it was so authentic and wonderful, and so absolutely yes, so much of it is nonverbal. And the follow-up question I had for you is, you mentioned, talent can help. What does that mean in terms of the art and practice of psychotherapy? Or what, maybe it can look like many different things, but what does that look like for maybe someone who's listening, who's wondering if they are maybe naturally inclined to excel at this work?
I think you can spot talent on the playground, maybe. Some kids, other kids talk to. They find them, and somehow there's a connection of feeling and story. Even little kids do feeling and story, and there are just people who are ready to listen. They may be outgoing people. They don't necessarily have to be introverts, but and most people have. If you ask teenagers, do you have any friends who are really good listeners? They always know somebody. They always have somebody. It could be a relative, an older relative, but I said, I'm your own age. Are there people who are good listeners? Yes, always yes. So, is that an inclination or a talent? Doesn't matter. It equips someone well to begin to learn the refinements of psychotherapy. Most of what we learn early on is when not to talk, or just to speak non-verbally, the way you're doing right now, and I'm talking and gesturing, and we're probably going to switch in a moment. So to be in that conversation in a way that's comfortable and fun, maybe, or in psychotherapy, it could also be comfortable and fun, but it could also be profoundly challenging and deeply healing.
Absolutely. This this thing you said earlier about being an audacious therapist. I just resonated with the whole download. I was trained psychodynamically, and I had this, and it's funny, just like because I know because it was such just like a walking stereotype. Because even though I would say I am largely, I mean, I'm integrated in my orientation, but the psychodynamic stuff is still there. It's a part of my orientation and how I understand and work with people. But today I self-disclose all the time. It feels much more like, it feels like I've earned that, I've earned like to be that way with different people. Maybe not when I first speak to them, as I'm trying to understand what's happening, but I can much more quickly assess, who I can do that with. But it's just, I just feel called to share that at the beginning I wore the same sweater every single day because I didn't know how to navigate those boundaries at that time. And we're taught blank slate or whatever it is, like about projection. So I thought it was like, well, if I kind of just wear the same thing every time, and I had my clipboard. I don't even take handwritten notes during sessions anymore. I do my notes after, and it's just it's interesting to consider how at the beginning stages of this process for you, when I'm getting trained, you're practicing your skills, and you say, well, it sounds like you're feeling blank. It sounds like you're feeling sad, let's say. And now I'm with the patient, particularly if it's someone I have good rapport with, and I'm just like, dude, that sounds depressing. Like, what happened now?
Yes.
It's just, I'm so much more authentic, And to your point about kind of being audacious and bold, I think one of the ways that I, at least, I'll just speak for myself, one of the ways that I learned how to do that over time was because there would be times where my countertransference would be so strong, I would have to respond. I would have to say something. And I remember the first times it happened, I felt guilt because I was so animated, or I was so, whatever it was. But those, first handful of times, I would go to my supervisor at the time with it, and we would talk about what happened, and they would say, well, it sounds like you nailed that intervention. Like, you know what I mean? They were like, it sounds like that honesty was curative, essentially, was basically my takeaway. And, that's not to say, for any therapists in training, I don't think you don't necessarily lean into that all the time, but my process has been, I learned that it's okay to lean into it sometimes. And now I'm growing, my ability to discern when to kind of let it rip, if you were, versus when to maybe withhold.
Yeah. You're talking to me like supervisees do sometimes, advanced supervisee. So just kind of did that little bit of history. And by the way, countertransference is kind of the feelings the therapist has for the client, and transference is the feelings that the client has for the therapist. And a lot of people out in the general public think transference is something bad. It means you fall in love with your therapist and it totally screws up the therapy, which it wouldn't necessarily at all. So it's kind of inevitable that those things go on, like as in any relationship. Except we can use them.
Yeah. How would I have talked to you if I was maybe exuding more colleague energy versus advanced supervisee? I'm just curious what you saw. I'm not totally sure I tracked it. Like the contextualizing?
The trust. It just felt, it was a very nice connection. And I was listening, and I was really into it as you were talking. And I had nothing to jump in with. If we were just having a conversation, I'd be kind of ready with my next thing. And I was just, so it's something I noticed about myself more than about you. Yeah, I was just,
Yeah, okay,
yeah,
fair enough.
Fair enough. All ears.
I had the distinct privilege and honor of doing an episode with Nancy McWilliams not that long ago. We did the recording, and so something that came up in our conversation was, she said, therapists, I'm paraphrasing here, but she basically said, therapists, practice, not reacting with affect, when people come in and they're emotionally charged. And she said that, I thought it was very, very interesting. She said, well, that's not how how a non-therapist, like typically, like the typical person doesn't have that much practice, like sitting in affect and sitting and being confronted with emotional intensity and not necessarily reacting. And she said that, you know, occasionally in her life, and I've certainly experienced this, I'd love to know what you think about it, which is I'll be at the grocery store. I think this is the example I used with her, and someone will be dysregulated, for lack of a better word. And I just like skillfully disarm. I'm like, I don't need any of that. You know what I mean? And I just kind of go, and my friend will look at me and be like, that was nuts how you just did that. And I'm not even conscious that I'm thinking like a therapist. Right. And I was just, but the idea of, you know, it's normal to actually mimic affect, quote unquote normal, right? That's how the typical people are doing it. But in therapeutic training, you interrupt that process of reactivity, you know, so you can respond with intention. And I guess I don't even really have a question about it. I'm just kind of wondering what you think, because I thought it was such a brilliant observation. She articulated something for myself in terms of what it's like for therapists not in session.
Yeah. I'm in mind of, I think I've written about this one. There's a screaming 3-year-old on an international flight. Okay. And the mother was beside herself, and they were kind of across the aisle. And I was just getting sick of it. So I came over and I said, excuse me, I'm a child psychologist, and I can see this is really tough. I'd love to help. So I switched seats with her, and I hypnotized the kid. I mean, you know, very informal. Like, I did a long exhale to start. I mean, technique. It's just kind of automatic, especially when there's a pain in the butt situation going on. This child was, he was the epitome of dysregulation. Okay. So then I pulled out, I had some toy or some darn thing, and I just started to play with it. The usual stuff to engage, connect, share, be together. It was mostly nonverbal. And I got 2 free bottles of wine from the flight attendants.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
I went back to my seat. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely.
Oh man.
And people say, "Oh my God, that was so amazing." I said, I think it's because I wouldn't maybe say it this way, but as a psychotherapist who's been doing it for a long time, I know how to listen and see and watch. And I kind of drop into that mode, of course, when I'm working with a student or with a client. A coaching client. I use that because it works anywhere internationally. I don't have to call it psychotherapy. Same thing. So you kind of drop into that mode as you did in the grocery store, and you were just acting like the person you have become since you became a psychotherapist, and you have that faculty now so that you can engage in an emotional situation and fix things pretty quickly, usually, unless they're really drunk.
Yeah, right. Fair enough. You know, earlier you talked about, like, you know, look for the teenager or the person on the playground who's a good listener. I don't know if I won't claim that label. Maybe people growing up would have described me that way, but I know that one of the things that people have often reflected to me, just throughout my life, ever since I was younger, is they've often said, I just feel like I can just be myself around you. Like there's this like lack of judgment that I get off, which is distinct, but maybe not totally dissimilar from like the good listening piece. And I think that is only, I've since getting trained, but also kind of claiming the professional identity of therapist, that has only doubled down in terms, you know, I'm in the elevator and someone will just say something so personal to me and I'm like, whoa, you know, boundaries, you know, but it's just part of my life. It's just what happens. One of the curiosities I had for you is someone that has done, you know, just hasn't just had his own career, but you said earlier has kind of given in supervision. What are some of the common struggles that therapists in training face? And I would like to caveat it with that these are things that people learn, work through, whatever verb you want to put it, and become and become even better therapists. Because I don't want it to sound, I don't want the discussion to be interpreted as, like if you're, if your therapist is in training, like they're not good, or like, whatever it might be. Like I'm really targeting it to be a little bit more kind of like hopeful and inspirational. But what are some of the common challenges, and could you talk about what it's like when people finally learn, or how they learn to kind of like work through those and kind of deepen their skills and deepen their awareness?
I'm really big on preparation. We have all this training, but I would never go out into the waiting room and bring a client in or turn on my screen without at least 3 minutes, preferably 5 minutes of preparation, which is, you could call it self-hypnosis or you could call it a meditative state. It doesn't matter. It's just a habit to drop down into a very calm, centered here and now. Then maybe if I know the client already, I imagine the client, and they're out in the waiting room, or they're in front of their computer waiting for me, and to send them love, unconditional love, in that very humanistic sense of unconditional positive regard, accurate empathy, genuineness, concreteness. You recognize those words from Carl Rogers, of course. And maybe not even with those words, but just kind of as a feeling, like kind of embracing the person, especially if it's a very narcissistic, self-absorbed person, or a person who's very angry, or something like that, or typically starts angry, or really hurt and vulnerable. I just want to emotionally, mentally embrace that person before I see them, such that when they come in, unless they're totally self-absorbed, they're going to notice that they're in a loving, caring, supportive, safe space. And then I don't have to ask them, oh, what are we going to talk about today? I hate that. I just wait and nod, maybe smile a little bit, and put out a hand or something like that, rather than setting things up and imposing my agenda immediately. I think too many therapists think they're in charge. We're responsible, but we're not in charge. Well, I've decided that this client is ready to finish, or this client isn't meeting his goals. I hate goals. That's another story. Goals and objectives. Those were created by insurance companies, so you could just get 9 sessions and then ask for 3 more. Because they're moving toward their goals and objectives. These are not piano lessons. Okay, so yeah, I think preparation is critical. If you do that, if you're well prepared before the client comes in, you're open to anything, ready for anything, and you've generated some warm, caring feelings for the person before they come in.
Could I ask you a couple questions
Sure.
about that? So I'll tell you how I typically conduct myself, and I'd love your perspective. The first thing I would say is that I typically ask people, at the beginning, is there like kind of like some version of like, well, like, where do you want to begin? I always make it theirs. And what typically happens next is they either have something, or they say like, I don't really know. And they'll often ask, they'll go, do you like, what did we talk about last time? And then I give them like a little bit of a refresher, and then we could just kind of continue. And so I don't do it like you do it. I'd be curious to know what maybe the other way to think about my approach in terms of pros and cons might be.
So, and of course it's different for each person. Okay.
Correct.
So last session, we were talking about this girl you met, and this is a teenager. This girl you met, and you really, really like her, but she hasn't even noticed you yet, and you blah, blah. And I could say that, and just start that as a gentle opening, with a nervous teenager, or with someone else, I could say, oh, I'm so curious how things went, but when you plan to confront your husband, and if that happened or how it happened, or whatever else. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty controlling. And it kind of leaves it open, and that's just right for some people. That some folks, if somebody says, I'm really curious about what happened with your husband, okay, I've got a starting point, I don't have to worry about this. But then 3 or 4 minutes later, they're talking about their mother, okay, or something else. So yeah,
Right.
I don't want to have a standard way of approaching clients, and that's why I kind of mocked the well, what do you want to talk about today thing. Like,
Right.
if I have a new therapist who says, well, I tell all my clients whatever follows, I don't want to hear it. I want to know what you can tell me. I want to be special. I want to be unique in all the world. So yeah. So I don't have a canned opener, but in that little meditation period, a possible opener happens. Typically, I would say at least half the time, I'll just wait. But the client and I train each other on how to do our sessions. So so they know that I'm just going to be ready and waiting. Or other people, they really like a prompt. Kind of sense that.
Understood. I hear you. I'm picking up what you're putting down. I was struck by how you talked about goals. I don't accept insurance. I haven't since grad school. And I mean, totally. And I typically will check in about. I am typically a goal setter with my patients, is the best way to put it. And the way I've always justified it, I'm wondering what you're thinking about it, is I'm not rigid about it. I want to be very clear, because there are plenty of sessions that I do leave room for that kind of organic meandering where you didn't even anticipate such a thing going up. I definitely intentionally make room for that. But my sense has always been, if you don't have an aim, you're not going to hit it. And I guess it's almost more of maybe it's kind of where like the business person in me kind of starts to feel concerned, where it's kind of like, well, you are here to get somewhere or go somewhere. And so I would like us to, even maybe not super quickly, but be floating in that direction, on the river. What do you think of that justification, and how would you upgrade it or challenge it?
Again, different for each person. Some people are really comforted by having clear goals and objectives and behavioral criteria for discharge and all the rest. How will we know when we're done? How will things be? How will you feel when we're done with the process? Sure. So sometimes structure comforts. It typically comforts the psychotherapist, okay? But it often comforts the client as well. Because it comforts me, I will tend to want to impose some structure. And so that's part of the preparation, is to learn not to do that, but to be ready to offer it if this particular client here and now is likely to respond to it. And watching the nonverbals very carefully when I say, I wonder if it would be worthwhile to talk about how angry you were with your dead father last week and how that impacted, etc. I mean, very directive, all the way to, I'm just waiting. So individual approach to each person. I always preach that, because just being recognized as unique can be quite healing.
And I imagine if I were to ask you, if I were to make a statement about doing that, in some sort of practice, or in some sort of kind of predictable way, like amongst my cases, you might say the experience of being of having a therapist kind of normalize an experience is also quite human. And it's highly like I guess the more I talk to supervisors, colleagues, even you in this conversation, the more it's kind of like context. There are no. This is not a very well. It's not a profession that encourages a lot of black and white thinking. So
I sometimes yell at clients. I really do. That's probably not as familiar if you're psychodynamically trained, and then I think you kind of moved into a more humanistic approach. But there's something about being having a trusting relationship, of course, and there can come a point in a really lovely connection where I can say, okay, I want to yell at you right now, but only with your permission. Yeah, go ahead. I say, okay, you're going to have to get off your dead ass and go over and talk to her. Instead of talking to you in your head and making yourself crazy with what she might say and what she might not say, is just go over there and just do. I don't want to talk to you until you do that. Come back next week and tell me you did it. This is special because it presupposes a significant amount of trust. And it also is something about me that at this age, I seem to be able to get by with that stuff and make it really effective. So I'm an instrument, and this instrument keeps changing because of aging. And, I spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia where people are very different in how they interact. And that impacts me quite a lot. People are very, much more interpersonally respectful and also love humor almost all the time. It's a social lubricant. And they adore old people, which is really nice for me.
Oh, note to future self. That's absolutely beautiful. One of my curiosities for you, because I'm so grateful to a lot of my supervisors and teachers. At what point do you feel like it's worth seriously considering switching to doing more supervision or to teaching? It's something that in my content, a lot of people reach out to me, and they're often undergrad students, psych majors, or graduate students in psychology, I'm hesitant because I'm still relatively young compared to so many practitioners. I'm hesitant to kind of claim that label like of teacher or supervisor yet, I guess. And so from your perspective, when does that transition happen? I think it's something I'd like to do, which is why I'm asking, but I'm just not sure when have I experienced enough? You know what I mean? Because of course I'll always keep learning, right? But that doesn't necessarily help me discern when I can start passing it on, if that makes sense.
I have a double comment. One is people ask me what's the key to happiness. And I typically say that my key to happiness is being useful to others. And I want to say yes to life almost all the time. But if somebody wants something from me that I can provide, yay. I'm useful. I don't want to ever retire and just kind of melt away or play golf all day or something. It just horrifies to think of that. I want to be useful on my deathbed, and if there are times they've been hospitalized, I'm teaching from the bed. If there's a student nurse or if there's an intern or something, I say, let me just comment on your technique. It would be positive and reinforcing, but I can't help myself. So it's about being useful. As to useful in what way, when did I become so much a supervisor? And again, not in the administrative sense for your listeners, but a supervisor means somebody who looks at things with you. It's from two Latin words. Supervise. We're looking together. So when did I start to become a supervisor? When people asked me to. They made me a supervisor by asking me to supervise something. I never put out a card saying, "Oh, David McPhee, supervisor." Um, the I think you almost have to create your supervisor, unless if it's a really specific skill that you've developed or something like that. Yeah, then you can advertise that and do workshops or something. Um, I I've trained people a little bit in clinical hypnosis and so on, and they have to know that I know about that before they're going to ask me to help with that, for example. But
Sure.
typically,
Yeah.
no, the student creates the teacher.
That's beautiful. I love that answer. What makes a good therapist? A lot of people who look at my content, what I notice from the comments is I will often see a message that's something like, you know, oh, I was nervous to go before, I saw this content or this, and it's not always on my page necessarily. I see it on other pages too, and so I think there's a lot of mystery, and so the intention behind my question for you is one of kind of lifting the curtain a little bit for those who are listening, particularly those who have never been before.
I've answered that question maybe 6 times on Quora, and I have these lovely long lists. I could have prepared,
Yeah.
but
Oh.
I'm not sure I'll even remember. So I'll just riff on it.
Yeah.
Good therapist is curious, caring, confident. Oh, these are going to be all C's now. Okay. Okay.
I like it.
Comfortable with self, and ready to engage, able to really let go and be present. If I'm watching some really amazing movie that, like I just watched the series Ripley. Oh, geez. Well, as a photographer, this is a photographer's movie, totally in black and white. But I guess maybe it was more the visuals. When I watched that, I was utterly riveted by that. I want to be the kind of therapist who is utterly riveted in that way by my client. Absolutely absorbed, fascinated, okay? Curious as hell. I want to be that. If I notice them being bored, it's not because the client is boring. That's my issue. Okay?
Correct.
So I'm going to be curious. I want to be able to be spontaneous and to be very observant and notice what's going on. I want to be someone who can create a comfortable space for another person, not just with the right kind of chairs and stuff or not the right kind of electronic equipment, but really create comfort in a way that's unique for that person. Some people are just natural at that, and some of us kind of have to learn it over time, but I want to be unconditional, absolutely unconditional in my care for the other person. They have to be the center of my known universe for those 50 minutes. And a couple minutes after, because I do have a little debriefing thing that I do, and certainly for the 3 or 4 minutes before.
It's beautiful. I love how your first answer was curiosity. I've always been a very curious person, so I think it helps me feel aligned in the work and the profession. And it's always been a good internal barometer. Speaking of countertransference, when I notice that I am not totally just saturated in curiosity, I'm like, oh, what is that? You know what I mean? And sometimes it's very useful to notice, for one reason or another. I often have this experience of, like, let's say I have, a packed day full of sessions where when I'm getting ready for the first one, there might be part of me where I'm like, am I really about to do like 7 sessions? Like, you know what I mean? Or like however many. But it's like literally within the first seconds of the first session, it's like I'm so just like locked in. and I'm so enthralled. And to your point, I've never, I've never met, I've never had a patient, who I didn't find completely, that I wasn't in awe of in their own right, you know, how lucky are we to get to hear their honesty,
Yeah. Okay.
you know?
Yeah. I see it. I was seeing it before. Now you said it. Yeah. Good. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, it's good for a podcaster too, to have that curiosity and that openness and that readiness about whoever you're interviewing.
Oh,
Yeah.
totally. Absolutely. Yeah. It's been absolutely wonderful. What do you think about the future of therapy? There's the world is changing so quickly. I mean, there's political change, technological change, cultural change, mental health over the last 5 years isn't just destigmatized; it's popularized in some ways. At least in the West. I don't know how it is in Asia or in other cultures. But I guess what are you? How do you understand the where the field is going? What is someone who's been in it longer than me? What are your hypotheses?
Artificial intelligence is rapidly becoming something that can provide a kind of psychotherapy. I use it a lot, and it always says, "Oh, what an excellent question! I'm so happy to help," or whatever. And I almost feel it.
Right.
I don't feel it, but I almost feel it. And it's obviously going to. We were playing with that in the '70s, and it was just these flat Kharkov level 3 empathic responses. But yeah, so sometimes I forget that I'm talking to a machine, and it's kind of fun. So I don't know where that's going. I've read some articles. I've even written a little bit about it, but it's all speculative because we just don't know. So obviously AI, and then the screen thing. Because of the pandemic, I had to get used to it, and I'm used to it. It's okay. If I'm talking to someone, I mean, I sense them that it seems like they're real. Is it the same as being here? I used to see people in this room. Is it the same? No. I really want to see them. I can't read the nonverbals the way I can in person. And, Joe, people communicate with their feet. I mean, we learn to lie with our faces, but we don't learn to lie with our feet. And so if you've got the person in front of you, and every time they start talking about their boss, that right foot just kind of comes up. So that's a clue. What's up with that? They're not aware of it, and they have this pleasant expression on their face, and the tone of voice is fine. But why is that? Is there some hostility or some, So I want to see the feet, etc. And I want to see the pupils. I can't see pupils. I want to see pupillary dilation, which lets me know that the person is probably a little anxious, et cetera, et cetera. Like that. And I can't see it. So I think, and I learned to listen harder, I think, and watch closer. It seems to work. It's psychotherapy, coaching, supervision, still okay, just different. Just different. It's much better than I thought it was going to be.
I did the majority of my grad school practicum and internship hours in person. And by majority, I mean like at least 51%. But it was in grad school where we shifted. And now at this point in my career, I have more experience with virtual therapy than I do in person. And I totally, completely agree. That's like, the feet talk. I'm vividly remembering a group I was like co-facilitating, and the senior counselor, goes, what is your foot saying right now? And this individual just like bursts into tears, and you're just like, oh my goodness, and it was lovely in terms of, an intervention. And I don't get to see the feet. There is still some body language, when I treat couples, I notice when they stop holding hands, because there's kind of like the shoulder or like whatever it might be. But one of the things that I have loved about virtual therapy compared to the in-person is that on many occasions, I get people it's just a more raw moment, because they were just in their offices, in their homes, talking to their partners or children, and they sit down and something that, this didn't happen that long ago. Someone sits down and they say, I just slammed the door on my partner, and so I'm sorry if I feel, if I seem so pissed off. And I was able to reflect to them. I was like, you're not occurring as pissed off, at all, actually. And like they really kept a lot of it in. And it was like, I feel like it was difficult to get some of those clues and insights when they had like the 20-minute commute. I also noticed more people in person. My anecdotal experience has been that people showed up more kind of with something to say, because like, they're in the waiting room and they're like thinking about like, what am I going to talk to my therapist about? And they like come to it, versus I find more with like the virtual, it's like there's a greater utility for like a quick grounding exercise or something to kind of bookmark the beginning of the session, like a feeling check-in or something like that. You know what I mean? Because they were just, on the call or just dropped off the kid or like whatever they were doing. And so it's different. I guess we'll know one day if it's measurably better or worse, but it's, there were some unexpected benefits. The other thing I didn't totally anticipate was the intimacy in terms of they can see me in my space, and this corner is very intentional for the camera, but during COVID, I was a total digital nomad, and so they'd be like, oh, are you traveling? Like there would be this like, and that was just a whole different conversation, which not even in a bad way, for anyone listening, but it was just not what the field was used to, always seeing them in the office.
True.
Well, unfortunately, we have to wrap up soon. Do you have any questions for me or any words of wisdom for the people watching and listening just about anything that we've talked about today?
I'll say 4 words. Pay attention. Practice compassion. Beautiful. Now go on, and you'll probably be happy. But yeah, pay attention and practice compassion. Absolutely. I have no idea where I heard that or if I made it up.
I don't know either, but it's beautiful. I've been thinking about compassion a lot recently, and how it's, I define it at least as distinct from empathy.
Yes.
As because in compassion, there's the warmth and the goodwill, but you're not necessarily getting swept up in their pain or their suffering or in their anger or whatever it might be. And it's something I'm so grateful. It's a skill I'm so grateful to have practiced, like internally knowing the difference between those two things. Because I think a lot of people don't know that there's a difference. And I think that can make life very hard, unnecessarily so.
It's like reaching out a hand to another person and taking their hand, and you're standing on a rock and they're not. And there's that connection, that wonderful human warmth and caring, and even a joining of hearts. But one of the people is pretty steady right now, in a good place, and can almost share some of that with the other person who may be in pain or fear or loss. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like talking about compassion. Thank you. Yes.
Well, thank you again so much for coming on. Like I said at the beginning, it was just a real treat to get to talk to you. And for those of you who are still listening, please like and subscribe so you can get notified when we have David back. And we'll see you next time.